Welcome. Welcome to Pacific Unitarian Universalist Church. We are a welcoming community to nearly everyone. Mean-spirited people can stay at home. The wind gusts can stay at home. I'd like to start by suggesting that just a note around COVID. We've all, to some degree, gotten used to this odd new normal. Sometimes that can work against us. There's been over 300,000 cases in LA County. Just sort of a moment to be mindful about that. It's been more than 7,000 deaths across the US. There's been over 230,000 deaths. Right now, about one person gets COVID about every second. So as we adjust to this normal, mask wearing, all of it, let's make that as normative as we can be. To put it in perspective, not to begin on such a heavy note, but to put it in perspective, COVID takes about the same amount of people that lost their lives in 9/11 every day. On cheerier notes, we have a lot of stuff coming up here, folks. We have a little soup program that we're running every other week. It's the 7th and the 21st, where people are buying soup, very high quality soup from the kitchen on the 7th and 21st, and the benefits of that go to the South Bay Food Initiative. George Stein is behind that. We thank him for that. Next Saturday, we have a cleanup here at church from 11 to 2. People can work in the path, or can they work in our permaculture garden, which is just beyond this gazebo here. On the 14th, that following Saturday, I want to mark those 2 Saturdays for people, because at 3:30 on the 14th, right after we do Laundry Love, we're going to have a talent show, kind of talent afternoon, just for fun, nothing serious. And we're going to have a professional comedian come, and our own Severin's going to come and play some. Anybody who has any feels like they have any talent can jump in. We're going to go for about an hour from 3:30 to, say 5 with whatever kind of entertainment we can gather. We want to beat the weather and beat the darkening of the sun. So we're going to have a little bit of celebratory event. Next Sunday, important to know, the 8th, we're going to gather here, socially distanced on the patio. So this is if you've been cooped up at home or just want to come see your friends, if not, hug them, which we're not going to do. We're going to have a post-election debrief as our service. I'm going to pick up my sheet one more time. We're wow. Thank you. The fundamentalist churches have responded to my interests, to our activities here. So we're going to have a talent show on the 14th. On the 15th, we're going to come back with another version of what's our theme today, which is mental health. So next week, following the election, it made sense for us to have a chance to speak. We don't know what's going to happen. We will have 1,000 different opinions on what does happen, but I thought people might want to hear their friends voice an election that's been probably the most poignant one of our lifetimes and come for that. So this week we have voting here. So if anyone hasn't voted, this is an open election site. So people are coming all the way to Tuesday night. We're open from basically 10 to 8 every day. On election day, it's a little bit longer. And we're also going to have the senior covenant group meet on Tuesday in the afternoon at 3. We have seekers going to meet as well at 10 o'clock on Wednesday. And the men's group, really largely for the first time, is going to meet Thursday at 9. So those are all activities we're trying to engage in now. I'm going to light our chalice with words from Molly Brewer. And I'll light that and share them. Molly Brewer says, "My beloved people, I cannot pretend, so I will not tell you that everything is okay right now. There is no reason to be angry, that you should be optimistic or at peace. I cannot pretend these things, and so I won't tell them to you. But now our chalice is lit. And so I all ask in this moment that we remember the words of Rebecca Parker. There is a love. There is a love holding us. There is a love holding us all." I picked those poignant words because today's topic is a little heavier than most. About a month ago or so, we were sitting at Laundry Love. Laura Childress and Soren Geis were there, and we engaged in a conversation that got pretty rich, sitting behind tables with boxes of dryer sheets and Tide Pods. We had a rich conversation about mental health. They shared personal tales of well-being and not. The conversation had this perfect insider-outsider quality to it, and mostly I just sat and listened. I was moved, and from other pushes, we decided to do 2 conversations on mental health and are going to hear from folks who have their own stories around that. So these conversations pushed me to invite a number of people forward. And the truth is, lifting up what brings many of us down and runs us around from the inside has long been on my mind. I'm an insider to some degree to mental health challenges, first and foremost being an imperfect human being. Second of all, living on the mild end of the ADHD spectrum, I've sat in my share of therapy sessions. I have been, for a couple months, poorly diagnosed, been handed medications that didn't serve me like many people feel like they have. But what's going to happen today is people are going to claim to themselves and to those watching that they have a problem. They have issues that are not going to go away by force of will or time, and that's hard. I probably don't need to tell you that it takes courage to come up in front of a camera for conceivably all the possible world to see and share parts of our life that we don't instinctively take photos of on Facebook. I say that because our friends here today who will speak will share some part of a truth that's that they know needs to be told to tell the full truth. And they're going to tell those stories without wanting to be pitied or judged or defined exclusively by what they share. They're all full human beings with amazing talents. And I know our friends today will do that with the courage and the faith that they're not proven wrong. That every one of us is a full human being in all our ways, despite what any of us face. So today we're going to hear from Kelly and Brad and Laura. Next week, we're going to hear from Laura and Brad again, as well as from Terry and Naresh, and there might even be others who step forward. So these folks will tell their stories. They'll dispense the advice that has been hard-won, and as this tradition does, it'll do so to build a more truthful, beloved community. UUs never pretend to live in a perfect world. Our tradition always wants to start with what's real and build the best possible world from what's real. So, with the words of Maya Angelou guiding us, her wise statement that when we know better, we do better. And that is what today is about. So this is a two-part journey, and I'll leave it at that. We're going to start that with a hymn by Severin. Thank you.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Thank you, Severin and Ed. So, did everyone have a good night's sleep last night? This is a chance for the children to come forward, prompted by a little stuffed animal and what might be a blanket. So you probably sleep with something that comforts you if you're a kid, and if you're not in front of the screen, I encourage you to do so. So people sleep with things that are comforting to them. And today's a really difficult topic. It's sort of like as if people who have mental health problems, one of the metaphors that has been used and comes to us from the Bible is the idea of people having to sleep with a rock for a pillow. So not comforting things, but Jacob, who is a biblical character, he was being chased by his brother, and he was exhausted. And he laid down, and he famously used a rock for a pillow. And I thought that made a lot of sense for what it would be like to live with something very hard that you couldn't put away. So I brought this rock and a pillow. And if you have something like that at home and you want to try it tonight to sort of put something really hard or just a rock under your pillow and see what it feels like to sleep like that, it might be very frustrating. And one of the ways that people talk about mental health issues is the long-term struggle it takes to live with them. And it's hard for other people to always understand that. We can understand maybe a little bit of what it's like to be blind. If you cover up your eyes, you can sort of feel that whatever challenge that would present. Or if you cover up your ears, maybe you listen to video games, or you put sound things on, it would be hard to live without hearing. But when you have a mental health problem, it's harder to see. We don't have broken legs, you don't see it. So we need to be very sensitive to people who have struggles that we can't identify that clearly. Sometimes things that trouble us are not evident to other people, right? So with those folks, we want to take good care, we want to love people, and we want to listen to them. We want to let them lead the way in terms of what they need, right? Just like you want your parents to listen to you and what you really are concerned with and where your interests really are. You don't want to be forced to do stuff you don't want to do that you don't have to. You want to make choices. People who struggle with mental health issues, we need to let them lead the way and help and support them on their journey. So being sensitive to the invisible things that we can't see is a wonderful way to be a good person. So keep that in mind as you walk through your life. Not everybody has the same level of buoyancy or the same good feelings all the time. They vary to people, just like the size of our noses and our heights and different colors and sizes. Everybody lives with a different sense of what it's like to live in their own head and in their own body. So we need to be very thoughtful about that. And in this church, we encourage people, all churches really, hopefully should encourage people to be sensitive to those issues. Thanks. That message is also a good instinct and a good way to lead into our joys and concerns. So we have some of the folks who are home. Some folks are constantly struggling with their own mental health. Some people are recovering from the people in COVID as we head towards the winter months and probably the spike in numbers that's increased. We think about that and we try to be as sensitive to it as we can. Let's take a moment while I light our candle of joy and concern for all those concerns that remain unsaid out there, all those people who can't voice what their concerns are because we're not in person, which we all wish we were. So let's take a moment of that while I light our candle. Thank you. It's time for our prayer. This was the basis of this was sent to me by a very good friend of mine who lived back east and shared this ramble of feelings that they gave me permission to kind of pull together. So I hope I do it justice. I titled it "Too Much Sail, Too Much Anchor." And I think I hope it speaks to what people experience who struggle with bipolar disorder. My journey is an odd one. Clear most days, mostly. But what people don't see, what I can't let them see, are the other days aboard my ship. Waves of anxiety, moments of murky plotting, dragging my rudder through an invisible mud that lives below waterline. Days when very, very, very reasonable plans become unmanageable. I know these depths like I know the lines on my hands, but still, when you feel pinned down by the undertow, it's never simple, even if you've been there before. Sometimes you can't muster the energy it takes to brush your teeth. Debilitating, dishearteningly, life-questioningly scary. And when questions of life like this arise, so do more practical ones. Are they asking at work where I am? Or why am I being punished? And what part of me is the real me? Questions like, did I fly under the radar screen one more time? And why can't I captain a normal ship? Mostly it closes and I return to clear days with thoughts that involve no wonder I'm alone and nobody wants to be around my insanity. Those are the rocks that I live with under my pillow. But nobody can know that. Nobody can know that. Sometimes I dare to pray and dream and wish that I didn't have to be me all the time. We take those deep thoughts and we hold them in our hearts and we try to heal one another as we do here. And we take that prayer to musical support with several. Thank you.
I'm going to share with you a little bit of information. The LA bus route, the longest and best route to get a good night's sleep, is the #2 bus that runs from Santa Monica to downtown LA. The best bench near the fair in Santa Monica is the Ferris wheel directly underneath it on the Santa Monica Pier. And the best place for canned goods and dry goods is a large Catholic church in Hollywood. And I apologize, I can't remember the name. Today, in 2 weeks, you're going to be hearing a lot, I think, more personal, deep stories of what people are going through and the challenge they had and the hope they see in the future. And I'm going to cover that a little bit of my background as well. But I'm going to do it a little bit different. We all know there's a mental health crisis in this country. That's nothing new. We see it with the homeless. We see it with people being shot and killed when they should have been getting mental care, but there weren't people available. But I want to give you a real idea of just how bad it is, or at least how bad it was for me. What I'm going to share about is the horrible experience of having no money and searching for aid. With a limited time, I'm going to try and do this through story rather without having to do a grocery list, and I'll do the best that I can. I struggled with mental illness my entire life. I was first diagnosed somewhere with depression somewhere in my teens, but I was functional. At times, I was the best employee that anyone could ever imagine, and at times, I was the worst employee that any boss would ever have to deal with. I was lucky that the times that I was the best employee overcompensated for the times that I was the worst employee, and so I was able to advance in my career and lifetime. I started in the hotel industry as a bellman in a hotel. And when my story begins now, I was actually the area director of reservation sales for a major hotel chain. I oversaw all reservation offices from Monterey to Anchorage, Alaska. And I was most proud that I covered the most exclusive hotels in the city of San Francisco. The positions things started, in that position, things started going wrong. At the beginning, my boss thought I was wonderful. And then things started to change. I became obsessive. I became depressed. I couldn't make it to work some days, or if I made it, I was not productive in any way. And feeling I was going to lose my job, and feeling like I needed a change in my life, I quit my job. This is after a long, really good career. I quit my job and said I'm moving to LA. I had no idea where I was going to work or where I was going to live. I knew things had to change. Well, moving doesn't change those things that are going on inside your head or inside your body. Um, I was laid off. I was able to find a job that was very similar to my job that I had before. But in 9/11, right after it occurred, like a lot of hotel employees, I was laid off. It devastated the industry, as you can imagine. I'm going to skip a little ahead for a couple of years. I had a very difficult time struggling and trying to hold on in a disastrous relationship and dealing with drugs and alcohol. And I'm going to start with 2003. And that's when I got sober. Uh, and the reason I got sober is I went to the mental health clinic at the wonderful Los Angeles Gay and Lesbian Center. And they had therapy based on a sliding scale, and I had to pay $1 per therapy session. And after 3 sessions, my therapist said, "Get the blank out of my office and go to the AA meeting. There's nothing I can do for you." And it was the best thing he ever did. So I did go to AA and I went through rehab. And after that, and going to meetings, I saw my friends to rehab, their lives were getting better, but my life was getting worse and worse. And I didn't understand why. And it was during an AA meeting that I was talking to someone that I didn't know very well. And I don't know what I said to him, but he politely walked away and told some friends of mine, "You need to get Brad to an emergency room immediately. He's suicidal." I didn't realize, man, I'd been talking to was a psychiatrist. So I was rushed off to Cedars-Sinai Hospital, which had a wonderful psychiatric ward. Unfortunately, they don't have that anymore. I was put on the dual diagnosis floor, and dual diagnosis means you have a mental illness as well as an addiction. Uh, I was checked in for the normal 3 days that is required by law for somebody that's suicidal. At the end of those 3 days, the head of the psychiatric ward came to me and said, "We want you to agree to stay for a full 7 days. If you don't agree, we're going to keep you anyway. But by agreeing, you save us a lot of paperwork." So I did. I agreed to 7 days. And at the end of the seventh day, when I was expecting to leave, the psychiatrist came back to me and said, "We can't let you go." But this time wasn't because they didn't feel like I was capable of leaving. The law requires that they release me to someone in mental health care, and they couldn't find a mental health clinic that had availability to take me on. So for 3 more days, for a total of 10 days, I was in the psychiatric ward. Finally, on the 10th day, the psychiatrist came to me and he said, we were able to find you a county mental health clinic that we could release you to. And he said, "I always heard how bad things were up there, but I never imagined it was as bad as it is." So I lived in the valley in Van Nuys, and the clinic they found for me to get my help was a 4-hour bus ride each way further east. So I had to take a 4-hour bus ride, see a therapist for maybe 10 minutes at the most, be given some meds, and then take another 4-hour ride home. That lasted for a little while, but meds aren't magic. They don't cure you immediately. And I stopped going, partly because I just couldn't take it anymore. And I ran out of money, and I had to leave my sober living. To survive, I was sleeping on people's couches. And I did that as long as I could. I didn't have many friends because most of mine were drinking buddies, and being sober, they weren't really friends anymore. But I found couches here and there that people would let me sleep on. And I did that until no one would take me in anymore. And that's when I wound up on the streets. Now, most of the time I wound up in West Hollywood and Hollywood. Now, I did try to find a job during this time period, but it's hard to find a job when you're trying to find a place to put your knapsack every day to hide it. It's hard to find a job when you're trying to find food to eat. And it's hard to find a job where you're trying to figure out where you're going to sleep every night. But I did put an application here and there. I was putting in applications because my sponsor in A said, "You can't handle a job that takes a resume. You need to fill out applications." On the days that I was lucky that I had bus fare, that's when I got to sleep on a bus at night. And I said the number 2 bus was the best bus, and that's because it ran so long. And there weren't a lot of swerves, so my head wasn't banging against the window. Sadly, I know from experience that the number 3 bus is a little longer, but there's lots of curves and it's hard to sleep. Um, I spent a lot of time in Catholic churches. Now, I'm not Catholic, I'm not even Christian, but as an atheist, they were a sanctuary to go to just sit and be. In addition to those Catholic churches, I spent three times a day I went to AA meetings. These were all because I had nowhere to go. When I ran out of money for the bus fare, because each time you took the bus at the end of each line, you had to pay again to go to the other end. And I never knew where I would end up. And if I was lucky, I would end up in Santa Monica, which had some nice places to sleep. They don't allow you to sleep in the doorways, but you can sleep on the benches. If I was unlucky, I would end up downtown near Skid Row. And unfortunately, that was not a place that you could sleep because it was too dangerous. I just had to hold on my knapsack and stay up all night, hoping I didn't get robbed. I kept trying to go to mental health clinics. Most frequently, I went to the one in Hollywood, and I kept being turned away. They were too full. They couldn't take on more clients. I tried PATH, and for those that aren't familiar with PATH, it stands for People Assisting the Homeless. And I got to tell you, it's an excellent organization. Maurice and I give to them each year, but they couldn't help me. Now, I say it's an excellent organization because they give people showers. They have hairdressers that come in. They have clothes to give away. They help to find jobs. They help to find homes. But like any charity organization, they were overworked and understaffed and didn't have enough money. So 3 times I went to PATH. The first day I got there late, I took a number and I sat in this large crowd. The best I could do was I got a sandwich for lunch. They told me to come back earlier the next day, so I did. I had the same situation. They said, come back earlier tomorrow. And I came an hour before they opened and the line was still around the block. The third day, I still didn't get help and I gave up. I did end up somehow getting back into sober living. I couldn't tell you why, a lot of this is very blurry. But through sober living, I met a friend who was able to get me a job in a coffee house and I had a place to rent. I became a barista at a coffee shop. And again, things got better for me. So I not only became a barista, but I became a manager very quickly. And eventually I became the manager of their flagship store located in Beverly Hills. That was when things weren't great. Things started to go bad again. And the CEO of the company who frequented my store was ready to basically told my district manager, I think it's time to get rid of this guy. So they transferred me to Manhattan Beach. And that's how I wound up here to the South Bay. She said, I need to get you out from under his wing so you can do what I know you can do. And I did okay for a little while, but my performance was really a struggle. My safe was always empty, but I would take my pay and to fill it back up. I had no idea why these things were happening. I couldn't deal with my employees. And eventually I couldn't go any longer. This was after I had met my current husband, Maurice. We met when I was living in someone's home in Brentwood. And he was transferred to the South Bay at the same time that I moved here. And so he saw my struggles and he saw what I was going through. And he saw what happened when I just couldn't go to work anymore. I just couldn't make it. And I basically quit my job over the phone. I didn't quit. I was put on disability. My manager assumed that I had a nervous breakdown. I was going to sue the company for it. Again, I couldn't find help. I was trying to find anywhere I can. We still didn't have money. And I went to San Pedro. And there I tried to get help. And I got on my hands and knees and asked for help. And I heard the saddest words I've ever heard in my life. We can't help you. You're too high functioning. Come back when you get worse. Not if, but when you get worse. I struggled again. And where I can tell you I got help was, it got so bad that I was suicidal again. And Maurice and Reverend Terry from his church took me to Harbor UCLA. Went there, I was checked in their mental health board, and I was told I had to leave, that there were people at home who would take care of me, and they couldn't handle it. I refused to leave. I said, I'm not leaving until I get help. And The psychiatrist went away for a good long time. She came back. This was probably 3 or 4 in the morning. She handed me a phone number and said, I have a place for you to go. And that is when I first was able to get checked in to a mental health clinic and was very first diagnosed correctly with bipolar disorder. And I'll save you the due to time, I'm going to save you the rest of the story. But many of you remember me from that time at church when my eyes were no longer blue but were gray. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't talk to people. I was very agoraphobic. If somebody tried to talk to me, I would walk away and would sleep. So I'm thankful that it's church. I'm thankful that I'm on that medication. Though, as was said earlier, things aren't perfect. But I hope that gives you an idea of just what it's like for those with no money out there trying to get help.
Just, I want to introduce Laura Childress, but I also want to remind folks that something Brad did not share is that he's now a successful author with published works and has a podcast. And that story has a more positive spin than you led us to believe. Laura.
Hi, good morning. Our dog died Thursday night, and we waited too long. The hours before we got him to the ER were just grim, and it's a really sad time for a family. But I have to say, I'm glad as well because I have bipolar disorder. And while my hypomanic highs are delightful and productive, and I wish I could spend my whole life there, cumulatively, they're not frequent enough. And cumulatively, I have spent years depressed. Being just plain old normal sad about our dog is a blessing, and I'm really grateful for it. The challenge I've been given today is to describe bipolar depression and share ideas for how friends and acquaintances can be supportive. I had probably a 20-minute thing written of everything I'd like to say. And then to cut it down to 4 minutes, I decided for me, the important thing was to be very descriptive in general terms of what depression is like and be very concrete about suggestions. So there's not tons of personal stuff in mind, but I'm happy to talk about it anytime. So feel free to invite me back. Those of us with mental illness can appear perfectly functional. Even if you know your bipolar friend is down, you often can't tell whether the depression is just like a gnawing at the back of their brain or a code red emergency. It's just not obvious. They might hold it together during your conversation, and yet on the drive home, they may be just possessed with the idea of driving into the oncoming traffic, and what a good idea that seems. Appearing normal requires lots of energy, and you can see why your depressed friend might avoid socializing. More than deep sadness, and in fact, depression doesn't always include sadness. There's a lot of parts to depression, and some combination of these make up depression with or without sadness. So feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, worthlessness, being fatigued, extremely fatigued, having an inability to focus, and an overall mental dullness. You just feel like there's a cloud around your head. And then for additional fun, there's perseveration, which I love that word, but it's like having the most painful, horrible thoughts on this ever spinning gerbil wheel, just running around in your brain over and over and over again. In a bipolar depression, there can even be a disconnection from reality, in which it feels like other people or even oneself are monstrous and unreal. And I can share with you that when I'm in a really deep depression and I look in the mirror, I literally see an ogre. Like I don't see this. I see just this ogre of a person. Or the world seems as if it's dissolving around one, sometimes even literally. And as you can imagine, experiencing even a few of these, from the first ones I listed to these more concerning ones, make functioning in life a real challenge. So to me, the bigger challenge of this talk is to describe how you can be supportive. And I There's many loving people here at church, both as friends and as lovely acquaintances, who want to be supportive and know their people around them are feeling down. And so here's some suggestions for what works. Oftentimes, a depressed person who has bipolar disorder craves relief. They may not feel they deserve it, they may not feel it's possible, but they crave it. Typically, we have no idea how to ask for it, or more likely feel we don't deserve it. So here are the suggestions. First of all, go ahead and be funny. It sounds strange, but depressed people can laugh or at least grin. And we might feel ghastly right before we laugh and right after we laugh, but a funny story can be a gift of a few minutes outside our heads. And if we're really lucky, we'll carry that glow with us into the day, or maybe even for a few days. So go for it. Feed us. This is an illness after all. Be it a treat of a meal or a treat, a food can be like a warm hug. Tell the person they matter to you. Even to someone you don't know well, you can say, I always enjoy it when we talk, or I always like it when you wear that sweater. One lovely member of the choir to me once, I'm going to choke up on this one, but once just came up to me out of the blue and said, you're one of the people I look forward to seeing. It always makes me so happy when I see you. And I still carry that. You're saying that the space they take up in the world is valued. And that's the last thing you feel when you're depressed. Any of these would mean a lot. Making plans can be overwhelming. And well-meaning friends will say, tell me when you're free or something. That's just inconceivable. So if you want to do something, call and say, I made extra soup. Is now an okay time to drop it off? Or would you like to come over for a cup of tea or beer or whatever this afternoon? Or go for a walk. Time outside is fantastic. And add on to that, we don't even need to talk, because holding up your end of a conversation can be just too much to contemplate. But if you have a friend who really you can tell gets it, that you could walk on the beach and not say a word, that would be a huge relief. And then if your friend turns you down, go ahead and ask again next week. Sometimes what's too overwhelming today is very much appreciated the next week. So don't give up. And I have to say, I have a really lovely friend who is exactly that kind of friend. She'll come in, see what she can do, back off, come back in, but she never gives up on me. And finally, be careful about comparing their depression, even by inference, to times you have been down. Now, if someone you know is having to clean out their parents' home after their parents died, it is a gesture of solidarity and of kindness to say, I've been through the same thing. And that's appreciated, and maybe you say a little bit about it. Don't go into long stories unless they're funny about it, but letting them know you shared an experience, that's super cool in many situations. But a bipolar depressive episode is different. If you've ever felt so down that it's prevented you from bathing for days or brushing your teeth, or made you long to lie down and go to sleep forever, or simply made you feel batshit crazy, then you could consider sharing a bit. I've had the experience of being very depressed and found myself comforting the person who's trying to support me about their difficult past. Now, luckily, I find the irony of that situation funny, even when I'm down. But even though I see the irony of it and can chuckle, it's exhausting and it feels unfair. The other difference is that many people's depression has a cause, often a painful loss or some kind of grinding stressor, but there's something they can point to that caused it. A person in a bipolar depression typically longs for there to be a logical reason that they are going through this. Comparing themselves to someone who's depressed for a good reason is really painful. As you can see, when one is depressed, it's difficult to discuss how it's feeling with someone who hasn't shared the experience. If we were to really say what is going on in our heads, it would be the emotional equivalent of vomiting all over your shoes. Most people aren't prepared to cope, let alone help with thoughts of dysfunction and pain this big. There's even medical professionals that can't handle it. obviously, every person is different, and each depression has its own texture. Even when depressed, we are not in the bottomless pit of despair all the time. There's gradations. What I've given you are suggestions and not hard, fast rules. I'd love to go into more detail at another time so I can give more nuanced suggestions. And I'm glad there are others here this morning to share their perspective. Next week, I'll be sharing some of the existential lessons living bipolar has given me. Until then, thank you for listening. One thing, I have to do a public service announcement for the National Suicide Hotline. It is amazing, completely non-judgmental, very kind souls, very well trained, and with wonderful practical suggestions. So I wish all of you a blessed week.
I want to thank Laura and Kelly and Brad for sharing, courageous things to share. I often utter some funny statement about our offertory. I'm not going to do that. I think this church would close its ranks and stop and fall into the canyon if we could stop depression and help things. We would, we're not that good, but we do need support to be as good as we are. And I encourage you, if you can find it in your finances to support us, to do so, and you can do so on our website. And for the pleasure of that effort, we will give you some pleasant music from Ed and Severin.
This church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all our differences, beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together, in spite of time and death and the space between the stars. We pause in silent witness to that unity.
May the blessing of love be upon you. May love's peace abide with you. May love's presence illuminate your hearts now and forevermore. So be it. Amen. Shalom. Salam. Namaste. Blessed be. And now our service truly begins.
Thanks for joining us today. Thanks to Laura and Brad and Kelly. And please think about next Sunday coming back to join us on the patio where we're going to socially distance. We're going to talk about the election collectively. And the next Saturday, we're also going to come here and clean up our campus. So a chance to get out of the house and be among your friends safely. Thanks for being here. 1 o'clock today, there's a conversation on race. We're going to talk about the possible 8th principle, Unitarian Universalist adding a structural racist principle to it. And lots going on here. And thanks for being a part of our family. Amen.